Have you ever really thought about how a country pays for, well, everything? Today, we're prying open the government's wallet. We're going to take a deep dive into the national budget. Now, I know it can sound a little intimidating, but trust me, understanding it is absolutely key to understanding how our economy works.
You probably have a budget at home, right? Money comes in, money goes out. Simple enough, but what happens when you scale that up to the tune of trillions of dollars? Let's take a look at how a national budget is kinda like ours, but also, in some really big ways, completely different.
Okay, before we start crunching any numbers, let's back up a step. Let's ask a really basic question. Why does the government even need a budget in the first place? Well, it really boils down to three main jobs it has to do. So job number one is providing what are called public goods. These are things that we all get to benefit from, but that a private company would have a really hard time selling. Think about stuff like national defense or clean air or even a public park. Let's break this down a bit because it's a cool concept. So a car is a private good, right? If I'm driving my car, you can't be driving it at the same time. And of course, if you don't pay for it, you don't get one. But a public park? That's totally different. Me enjoying the park doesn't stop you from enjoying it too. And it's pretty hard to put up a gate and charge every single person who walks in. Economists have a name for this: non-rivalrous and non-excludable. And that's exactly why the government has to step in and provide these things.
So what about the other two big jobs? Well, one is redistribution. That's a fancy way of saying the government uses things like taxes and social programs to try and create a more equitable society and support people who need it. And the second is stabilization, basically trying to act like a shock absorber for the economy, keeping it from getting too hot with inflation or too cold in a deep recession.
So you really need to think of the budget as way more than just an accounting sheet. It is the government's #1 tool for trying to juggle those three massive goals: growing the economy, keeping it stable, and making sure things are fair.
All right, so now let's actually crack open the budget itself. And just like your budget at home, it's got two main sides. You've got the money coming in, which are called receipts, and you've got the money going out, which is called expenditure. First things first, let's look at the income side. Where does the government get its cash? Well, all those sources are bundled together under the term receipts.
Most of the money coming in is from what we call revenue receipts. The easiest way to think about this, it's the government's regular paycheck. It's money that it gets to keep, it doesn't have to pay it back, and yep, you guessed it, the biggest piece of that pie is taxes.
But then there's this other category called capital receipts. Now this is different. This is money that either creates a debt, like taking out a loan, or comes from selling off an asset, like a government-owned company. So it's a lot less like a salary and a lot more like, say, taking out a mortgage or selling some family silver.
Okay, so that's the money flowing in. Now let's flip to the other side of the ledger, government expenditure. This is all the stuff the government spends its money on.
And this spending is split into two big buckets. First, you have revenue expenditure. This is for all the day-to-day running costs, things like paying government employees' salaries or the interest on past debt. Then you have capital expenditure. This is the big picture stuff, long-term investments that create assets for the future, like building new highways, ports, or bridges.
Okay, so what happens when the money going out is more than the money coming in? Well, that's a deficit. Let's decode the different kinds of deficits because they each tell us something really important about the health of the economy. First up, we have something called the revenue deficit. For the 2023-24 financial year, this number was 2.6% of GDP. But what on earth does that actually mean?
This number is a really big deal. A revenue deficit means the government's regular paycheck, its revenue receipts, isn't even enough to cover its day-to-day running costs. It's kind of like having to use your credit card to pay for your groceries every week. It means the government is borrowing money just to keep the lights on.
Now that borrowing for daily expenses is just one piece of a much larger number. And this is the one you've probably heard about on the news, the fiscal deficit. In that same period, it was 5.6% of GDP. This is the big one, the headline number. The fiscal deficit tells you the total amount of money the government has to borrow from all sources to cover all of its spending for that entire year. It's seen as a major indicator of a country's financial health.
But that huge number includes paying for things from the past. So to get a clearer picture of how the government is managing its money right now, we can look at something called the primary deficit. That was 2.0% of GDP.
The primary deficit gives us a really clean snapshot of the current government's fiscal choices. You just take the big fiscal deficit and subtract the interest payments on all the old debt. It tells you exactly how much the government is borrowing for today's programs, without the weight of past decisions.
You see, the budget isn't just a record of what happened. It's an active tool the government uses to try and steer the entire economy. The technical term for this is fiscal policy.
And when it comes to fiscal policy, the government really has two main levers it can pull. It can adjust taxes, and it can adjust public spending. By fiddling with these two, it tries to guide the economy in the right direction.
So here's how it works in theory. If the economy is in a recession, the government can try to give it a boost by spending more money itself, or by cutting our taxes so we have more money to spend. But if inflation is getting out of control, it can do the exact opposite. It can cut its own spending or even raise taxes to try and cool things down. Now, all of these yearly deficits, they don't just vanish. They add up, year after year after year, and they accumulate into what we call the national debt. But is that debt a full-blown crisis? Well, the answer is it's complicated.
There are really two big schools of thought on this. One argument is that, yes, debt is a huge burden. It saddles future generations with taxes, it can crowd out private companies from borrowing money, and it might even lead to inflation. But the other side says, hold on, it's manageable. They argue that if that borrowed money is used for smart, productive investments like new infrastructure, it can actually fuel future growth and more than pay for itself.
And this really brings us to the fundamental question at the heart of all of this. It's a massive debate in economics. What should we prioritize? A perfectly balanced budget right now, or should we borrow to invest in a bigger, more prosperous economy for tomorrow? There is no easy answer here, and it's a debate that shapes our world every single day. So, what do you think?